Hey guys, welcome back. We got an interesting thread here by Jabby, which I'm going to give my opinion on. I guess maybe after we read the initial post here, then we'll read the rest of them. And I want you guys to let me know what you think as well. But the title of the thread is "My Local Store is Only Buying Pre-2020 Collectibles." So immediately we're getting into basically, is it because stuff is overprinted? And I don't think that's the case. I think there are probably some other underlying reasons for that. A lot of the same reasons that I say all the time about how I collect and how I usually try to save money. But nonetheless, here is the post. Jabby says, so recently where I live, due to the events of the past couple years, a lot of business went under and a lot of new things have replaced them. In particular, a couple of high-end collectibles shops have opened up and so far have been booming even during this year. Turns out they also offer a PSA middleman service, which I plan to use at some point since it's really convenient for me. Anyway, one thing that caught my eye is that they strictly advertise that they only are buying pre-2020 collectibles due to supply issues. This includes everything from sports to Pokemon and Magic. I found this sort of interesting because obviously a lot of people who've come into the hobby buying up modern products seem to be banking on it being a home run investment down the road. I know that we discuss the modern speculation thing a lot, but regardless, I did find this to be an interesting data point to see how even some stores seem to be bearish on most modern post-2020 boom products. So here's the ad, I guess. We buy collectibles, cash paid for sports cards, 1910 to 2019, comic books, various grades and years, toys, collectibles, and sports non-sport memorabilia. Come in with your items or contact us via email or phone to discuss. No collection too big or too small. What do you think? What do you all think of this? Is this further indication of how the market is constantly being optimized going forward? I feel like we're sort of in the matrix with this right now, and a lot of people haven't stepped out of it who are still loading up on new seal boxes. Curious of your thoughts. So initially, my thoughts, I don't think this has anything to do with the extra supply. I mean, it might be. It's hard to say exactly what this store owner is thinking. If they don't have the expertise in Pokemon, then modern Pokemon is dangerous. Modern MTG is dangerous. Modern everything is dangerous because there's a lot of playability that goes into the value of those cards as they come out. It's just the same way if you're collecting as a Pokemon collector. If you don't understand, if you're collecting modern, you should at least have a basic understanding of what's meta and what's expensive for that reason. So if you were buying Arceus V-Star when it came out, it's still expensive because it's very playable. But if you're buying when it came out, it's already dropped a ton since then. There's certain aspects like that where those cards will have other versions printed because the Pokemon Company wants to make them accessible to everyone, and also to sell more products, as you know, they can make them into promos and sell promo boxes. But it's a little bit on the collector end of stuff. So if they're buying and selling a whole lot of everything, it looks here like they got a picture of all kinds of old collectibles and everything like that. Chances are they're not exactly they're not Pokemon centered enough to know exactly what they should or shouldn't be buying. As I've mentioned on the channel, typically if you're buying singles, if you want to buy them at their absolute cheapest, you want to buy them when the cards are a generation or two old. This hasn't changed. It's always been the case where if you're buying the new thing and you're not immediately selling it, then it's probably going to go down in value, and you could end up just not making money or losing money on some of this stuff. So modern singles in general, a little bit dangerous. I mean, there's a certain point where they're probably not going to go much lower, but at the same time, this is kind of a safer business model if you're not centered around that particular product. If you don't have the customer base that's going to be buying your playable stuff, then you probably just want to avoid it. I think that's all it comes down to. So I think this, and a lot of people have been speculating that, hey, this is based solely on the fact that they've been just printing too much of everything in post-2020, or like Sword and Shield sets. They're in abundance. Yes, they have, but you have to also realize, and I've said this before, there's a lot of chase. There's chase like there's never been chase before. We've had gold stars before that are like 1 and 2 or 1 and 3 boxes. We're talking ridiculous amount of product that you have to open to get some of these chase cards that it's just not going to be an option later on. We've had people, it's always been the case. Every single time, always, over all the years, everyone says everyone's holding on to 69,000 boxes of everything in existence, and I can assure you that just doesn't happen. People open them over time, they go up in value, they sell it, box breakers break it, whatever. It goes away. Doesn't matter. The people with the shelf in the background behind them with their shining fates or whatever on it, they're going to end up opening or selling that. There's a lot of people that are temporary interest. Usually, as I've said, most people that get into Pokemon are only in Pokemon for about a year. Then they move on to other things. So I don't think the printing, the increased printing is an issue because the new sets are just so incredibly hard to actually complete or pull any particular chase card that it completely negates the fact that they printed 69 jabillion cards. And sure they did, but also you got to remember a lot of that is your common, uncommon stuff. So bulk prices, yeah, probably going to suffer from that, probably have suffered from that, but the chase stuff, not a big deal. Although I'd still say that once we get to the end of the next generation or even to the generation after that, the Sword and Shield stuff will probably be at its cheapest in terms of like the singles. So they also probably aren't buying like sealed product because if they can just buy that anyway, or if they don't think that it's going to increase in value right away, long term sealed product, regardless of what it is, it's going to go up. At what rate it goes up is a different story, but yeah, those are my thoughts on it. So I guess in conclusion, I think this is mostly just them not wanting to put the time and effort and into modern stuff, because if you're an all-around store, then that's not really your thing. DDK says, interesting food for thought. I do still think there is opportunity with post-2020 modern products, but one needs to be very selective about what they pick up if they want to see larger gains. Generally, product with a small print run, Celebrations UPC, or more limited distribution method, Precious Collector's Box will perform better, but even that's a gray area given the amount of attention on the hobby right now and Walmart Poke investors stashing everything in their closets. So I think this is a temporary issue, and I think people are, once they realize that you can't stonk dog 69, 3x your money in a couple months, you got to keep this stuff for like 5 years, 10 years before you're going to see any kind of real return on it. Some stuff will be better than others, depending on how much was printed, depending on what kind of product it was. But overall, the Poke investors, seal collectors, they want to call themselves seal collectors, but the stonk doggers that just got into it are in for a little bit of a rude awakening, and they're going to sell off. I've already seen countless examples without even looking for it, where people are just selling their closet or selling their background shelf with their modern Walmart product on it, and that's just what it comes down to. And eventually, it's going to get opened. It's a one-way track. It can only be opened, well, I guess without people scamming or whatever, it can only go one way, and that is for it to go from sealed to open. So over time, you'll see it'll all still go up. But yeah, the 69 stonker overnight super flip is that's a thing of the past. Glad it is. It was a little bit exhausting. You know what? We can now rest easy. We're gonna be okay. We've seen with the Celebrations UPC that surprisingly not a reprint. Not saying that there won't be one at any point, because I mean anything is possible. But yeah, that was something that's probably a little bit of an outlier. We've seen with the recent Charizard UPC many more available than there have been. And that's just kind of the way that it works. That's the normal Pokemon market. There's usually nothing on release that is hard to obtain. And we're getting into that. We're getting into that that space where pre-orders don't really make a whole lot of sense unless there's like a good deal, or you know you're going to buy it from somewhere, because it's most things are going to be very readily available. All right, I doubt we will see anything resembling the gains vintage product has seen over the past couple of years. Yeah, I would imagine. And a lot of that was opened as well, so I think that offsets a little bit, but I can imagine that a lot of things retraced from where they were, even the sealed stuff with the amount that was open. I think people kind of underestimated the amount of vintage stuff that's out there that is sealed. Anything sealed is bound to go up given enough time once out of print, so I think it really boils down to whether collectors are willing to tie their money up in a widely held product for 5 to 10 years. Exactly what I just said. Very good point. I do feel the majority of collectors will cash out before then due to expenses, unforeseen circumstances, wanting to put money toward vintage purchases, or loss of interest in the hobby altogether. So yeah, wanting to buy other things, probably losing interest is a huge factor. And that's why I say like time in the hobby is the most valuable thing you can have, because not only are you constantly learning things, you've seen history repeat itself, and also just like with time, typically most of your collection should be going up in value. So that's pretty much it. It's not supposed to go up the way it did in 2021 and then crash back down. Typically it's a slow thing. It should take years. You want a slow, steady growth in order for it to be healthy, and that is not what we saw. So SM Pratt says it might be because they can still buy most of the 2020 to 2022 product from distributors. Very true. That, and if there's any of it that's overpriced, Evolving Skies boxes or whatever, then there's always like a looming threat of them releasing more. We just saw in Costco with the ETBs pumping those out for steals and deals in the United States. Hopefully we get those in Canada. I still want to pull that Umbreon and that Ray VMAX, but I would understand not wanting to touch post 2020 anything as a store, especially because not everything is Pokemon where people just want to collect. Yeah, I totally get that. I don't know. I think it's just like an area that you avoid. Modern in general is probably something you avoid as somewhere that, well, even then, there's a lot of modern stuff that probably took less of a hit than the vintage stuff in 2021. So it would have been scary to be buying that kind of stuff as a store, unless you're like, if you're buying at a fraction of the price and then all of a sudden you got to break even on some WotC hollows or something like that, maybe that's fine. But they might have got burned on that, or they might have got burned on some recent stuff. You can't predict what the Pokemon company is going to do, so if you don't specialize in that stuff, if you're not constantly watching it, like Modern could definitely put a big wiener in your game store. Jabby says, right, good point. I should also clarify that they are willing to buy some post-2020 stuff, but only very specific and limited items that are truly unique/rare. It's just, in general, they aren't going to buy bulk Pokemon or sports cards due to the high graded and raw supply and so on. So yeah, like the bulk stuff, I'm sure they should be buying it if it's like so cheap that it's like 50 cents a V or whatever that normal game stores will pay you on that bulk stuff. There's not really any way that they could lose money on that. Like, eventually they're going to sell, even if they only sell the Vs for a couple bucks, and it's just people that come in and buy them every now and then if they fill some binders with them. I don't see how that's a loss in any way, but it all depends on their model, their business model. And from the look of the ad, it doesn't look like they're really Pokemon focused in any way. I think that's the only game store ad that I've ever seen without Pokemon in it anywhere, at least from what I saw. I just found it interesting from a business perspective that they are seeing a more of an opportunity in pre-2020 stuff, which honestly makes good sense. I also think people are getting burned out because so many sets and products are getting pumped out faster than it seems. So I think just like anything Sun and Moon or older, the risk of that like dropping in price from here, Probably not going to happen. There's already, it's super, super cheap, and like a lot of the XY and Sun and Moon stuff. So it's already taken a dip. You know, when those Sun and Moon sets came out, it was all more expensive when it was more irrelevant. Now that it's not the new cool thing, it dropped in price. People are going to realize some of that stuff is hard to pull. And if they want to put together collections or whatever, then eventually those prices should creep back up. PFM, it's not like there is an existing precedent that overproduction of cards can harm the long-term value or anything. So yeah, definitely a thing. And like in terms of bulk, definitely. But it could be that they're just skittish because they saw like the junk wax era or something like that. That I'm not familiar enough with the sports stuff to know whether or not. I'm sure there's some of it that was, whether or not it still is, overhyped and overvalued at this point in time. It's hard to say. EV Team, not to turn this into the giant English market thread, but every investor has a closet full of Darkness Ablaze booster boxes. They are not going to double their money anytime soon, so it makes sense that a card shop wouldn't touch them. I would like to see any one person that has a closet full of Darkness Ablaze booster boxes. That's one thing that I don't think I've ever seen. I've seen a lot of the like Walmart shelf in your backdrop, but I haven't seen anyone with a closet full of Darkness Ablaze. I don't think that's a thing. This has always been like the misconception. Everyone's always just like, yeah, people have just like closets full of black and white. People have closets full of. They don't. It's not what they have. They're gonna have a lot of like the ETBs. They might have a lot of those Darkness Ablaze ETBs that popped up again recently. But that's the thing. It's just like, people overestimate the amount that people are holding on to. Sure, there's game stores that have like an abundance of some of that stuff. Most of them try to dump it because they don't want to be holding that for years and years and years. But not to say that they're not going to have some left over if the price gets so low that they just don't want to sell it at that point. But no one has a closet full of Darkness Ablaze booster boxes. I mean, maybe somebody does, but that's not a thing. Wise Whalmer says, smart store. Zorloth, I don't know, man. You should see the prices of sealed sports card product from the late 80s/early 90s. 30 years later, that shiz still isn't worth the paper it's printed on. Yeah, that was, I think that was a whole nother level, and I can't speak to the sports card stuff again. I'm sure there's some of it that's just like ridiculously overprinted. And then once people lose interest, there's always like the really chase cards, and sports is probably the worst for it in terms of like signed stuff and jersey swatchy-watchies and all that other crap that makes it harder to pull certain things. So I can see a lot of the maybe more common items maybe doing a little bit of a retracey, worthless kind of thing. But same with Pokemon bulk. The harder to pull stuff should be fine, I would think. Not to say it will almost certainly drop once we get into the next era and the next era after that. I think the Sword and Shield stuff will drop in price, and that's probably, if you're going for bang for your buck, again, singles at a generation or two old are probably the cheapest they will ever be. Not always the case. There's probably certain exceptions to that, but for the most part, that's a pretty consistent trend. Owen, I have no idea how to pronounce this, by the way. My apologies. We got kind of smart, but the store might want to cast their eye still to the exclusive Japanese Pokemon stuff. This is not a game store that's looking at Japanese Pokemon stuff. Chances are they don't know Pokemon stuff well enough to handle modern Pokemon, but it looks like that would be an even more of a stretch. Like, that's a whole another level of commitment that they're probably not doing. They look like they want to sell Star Wars and junk. Jabby, sorry for any Star Wars fans that took offense to that, but it looks like more of a all-around collectibles, not somewhere that's looking at modern Japanese and what's going to be exclusive and predicting what's going to be exclusive or what's going to be printed in English. That's a whole another level of outside of anything they're ever going to do, chances are. Jebby says, yeah, it seems that a lot of people still aren't comfortable on Japanese stuff. Exactly. It's understandable due to the language barrier, but there's some really nice cards and sets coming out of there as well. I think because it's more niche, I actually feel pretty good buying it because it's not so hyped up like a lot of English cards can be. Japanese cards are only a small part of my collection, but I hope to buy more at some point. The borders and hollows can look way better on some cards. So yeah, it's niche. The market for it probably not going to be as high. If you hit certain stuff, yes, that doesn't end up coming out in English. Sure, it can have some other. Typically, the singles, as we'll see with the Giratina alt art, once the English version comes out, typically the Japanese one takes a little bit of a hit. And there's always like certain stuff that's risky in that way. There's other stuff that we've seen is probably not going to come to English, but you never know. Pokemon Company International makes a whole lot of no sense when it comes to releasing things. It could just come in you could have something that's really valuable in Japanese. All of a sudden there's an English promo box and it's slapped in there. So hard to say. Stagecoach found this part fascinating. Today, cards limited to just one copy are fairly easy to find and cheap too. Cards limited to 100 copies are considered common and often sell for $1 or $2. That's how much the hobby has shrunk. 20 years ago, a print run of 10,000 was the pinnacle achievement. Today, superstar cards limited to just one copy can sell for less than the box they came in. This isn't always the case, as some of today's cards can sell for hundreds or even thousands of dollars, but there aren't many. So, yeah, there's always like a weird relationship too with like the sealed stuff versus like the chase card. And you can look at something like Evolutions where the box is more expensive than probably buying the entire set and just like near mint raw copies. So it's hard to look at it exactly that way, but all right. I'm often not sure what to think about sports cards. Obviously, the most valuable trading cards on earth are sports cards. Baseball cards in particular have a ubiquity and a legacy that makes even an uninitiated outsider like me aware of its iconic cards, and yet the hobby is consistently described as a dead, shrunken mummy. Well, I don't know. I think maybe even Pokemon would be more recognizable by like the most casual, non-interested, non-aware person. Like, I'm trying to think of like, maybe not naming particular cards, but in terms of like naming, like anyone can name Pikachu, even if you don't know anything about Pokemon or Charizard. Can they name baseball players that played from the 40s or whatever? Probably not. Only the most diehard of collectors seem to get it going. And somehow its prestige has sustained enough interest to catch the attention of supremely and extremely wealthy collectors. But when I think of sports cards with only frame of reference I have experience with Pokemon, it's incredible to me that there exists the gulf in high-end numbers that we see today. Mathematically, the interest in Pokemon is several magnitudes higher than the interest in sports cards. I don't have an insightful conclusion about this, but it's something I wonder a lot about. So, like, there's also a lot of like the sports cards. I mean, there's the recent stuff where they're adding extra chase to it to the extent that it's just going to make it more valuable. But as we've seen, like, I mean, sports has been around for ages. Sports cards for ages, back when they're coming in tobacco and a pack of cigarettes and whatever, versus, you know, Pokemon since '99 in North America at least. So it's hard to compare and compete that way. You have your high-end Pokemon, like your trophies and stuff like that, that is outside of, you know, it has the extra rarity to it. But I don't know. Will Pokemon someday surpass sports? Maybe. Could you explain this a bit more? It's different this time. Stagecoach, I guess I'm thinking in terms that very few things can rival the global interest in Pokemon as the most successful media franchise on Earth. There's actually, S.M. Pratt says, there's actually a legitimate difference between Pokemon In the early 90s sports bubble, Pokemon is still only printed by one company. Very good point. The early 90s bubble was due to multiple companies printing a metric ton of product. It was the beginning of numerous rookie cards. For context, 1979, Gretzky had the OPC for short? Rookie Canadian release, and Topps Rookie American release, both the same art/card. A current player today easily has 50 plus rookie cards from many different companies. Very true. Even with 3 to 4 versions of some Pokemon cards in a set, it's nowhere near sports cards, especially since most of the Pokemon cards are chase cards. Some the hardest cards to pull, plus there is no game mechanic in sports. The 3 to 4 different versions in Pokemon actually have a purpose besides making money. Yeah, some of it's a little bit filler, but sometimes there's like worse version of the Pokemon. I think the multiple companies, and there was like sports in the 90s. They used to sell, you could just buy full sets. Like it would just be a box and that's the full set. Like, that's not going to happen in Pokemon, especially not recently, where you can just buy it's just a box, a long box that's the entire set. There were some earlier, I guess, giveaways back in like the WotC era where they would give like full sets to certain people, but nothing on a magnitude of being able to go pick it up off the shelf kind of thing. So when you have multiple companies printing the living crap out of it, trying to drive the price down, trying to just sell as many sets as possible, basically, it's a huge killer. So I think sports is trying to like negate that with the Super Chase signed cards, swatchy cards, whatever. All right, last post here. EV Team says baseball cards were printed by Topps, Don Ross Fleer, and so many others. It's even more now, and endless possibilities with the 1 out of 100 cards. If I wanted a master set of my favorite player, there would be hundreds of cards a year to collect. In comparison, evolutions on both English and Japanese, all variations have only been a couple of 100 unique cards. The last year or two, that's 9 different Pokemon. Very true. I mean, there's also like certain chase ones, certain non-chase. So some of it, yeah, the bulkier ones probably not going to see an increase in value. But I mean, that's anything. There's even the oldest cards, first edition base is a little bit different where they went up in value a bit, but still very like the non-holos from first edition base, considering what they are not very expensive. And then if you look at like unlimited, it's all still dirt cheap because they just printed so much of it. The holos, different story, a little bit more valuable, but that's kind of what it comes down to. Back in that era, they also didn't have much chase, so you gotta work that in. There's certain eras of Pokemon where it wasn't very popular and a lot less was printed, and where people don't necessarily have as much interest in those eras. The card still might have value, or the sealed product especially might have value because there just wasn't much printed. So I think regardless, old sealed product, even if most of it is not going to justify opening. The price of the box is not going to justify opening, but it all kind of works itself out. I think there's not really anything to be worried about in terms of like value of sealed product from Sword and Shield, or the singles. The chase singles are going to be expensive. The reverses you gotta imagine someday are going to have some sort of value because they're so damn hard to pull. Like I open an absolute disgusting amount of Pokemon product, modern Pokemon product, nowhere close to getting the entire set. Like the chase cards and the reverses are so hard to open that you gotta trade, you gotta buy them, and even in quantities, you take a look at what's available. Even Sun and Moon era, I just placed an order from Troll. Sun and Moon era reverses, there's not many on there, and maybe some of it's to do with the fact that they're not that valuable, but at the same time, when it's like it's a $1 or $2 per reverse, you would think that people would be listing them. There's probably just not that many out there because you don't get them very often. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. Let me know what you think again, and make sure to join the Discord. I'll see you next time. I'll put a link to this thread if you want to add anything to it in the description. See you next time. Bye.